the sun is shining here in Stroud. So yeah, life is pretty good this Saturday. Very, very lucky indeed. And is life good with you in Surrey?
Well, I think it's safe to say that life has had quite a few ups and downs over the
Mhm.
past many years. This is another one. I mean, life is peaks and valleys, and it sure helps to have nature and the sun
Yeah,
and good company as a reminder.
yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, well, so thank you so much for joining us on this lovely sunny Saturday because what I really wanted to talk about was, well, what it is to be here now, because many of us here are what, we're going into our 6th week of lockdown, which, and I know that you, Lizzie, have been in lockdown a little bit longer than some other folks. There are a lot of other people who are, yeah, who are in that situation. So it would be lovely to just talk about what it is to remain, because I think it's, for me, the lockdown has served a really interesting sort of a bit of learning, because at first it was sort of very exciting, and then there's a sense of, I feel, restlessness now. And for me, this sort of resonates very much with my practice and what it is to stay when we feel uncomfortable. And before I kick off with those little thoughts, because I love to hear your thoughts on yoga philosophy, Lizzie, because you have done the work. We've got some lovely messages. Hi, Iraqi. Hi, Sandy. Hello, good afternoon, ladies. That's from Kathy. Great to see you. Hi, Susanna. Hi, Sharon. Thank you. Samantha says, I can't see any video yet. The video is up, Samantha. It may well be your connection. Sometimes during lockdown, we have, all of us, experienced a lot of traffic with the videos. So I think there has to be a lot of patience, maybe. Sorry. Hiya, Heidi. I'm glad that Heidi has joined us. So, Lizzie, what do you think about, well, what's your experience of how the yoga philosophy sort of ties in to our lockdown experience?
Well, it's funny you should mention this because I taught a class this morning, and I talked a little bit about how sometimes, I mean, the yoga philosophy, first of all, we're looking at something that is really vast.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get into the webbing of the various texts, they there's kind of two, I would say, kind of two categorizations. I mean, everything in the yoga philosophy is about separating so that we can somehow understand how to integrate and be here
Right.
now. And so these various texts, I would say, they're the kind of texts, and you see a big pile behind me. But there are the kind of texts that are storytelling texts that usually involve some kind of epic journey that is about taking the various different angles of the yoga philosophy and putting them into practice through a myth, through a story. And
Mm-hmm.
usually those stories have really sort of iconographic characters, and they are vast, long stories with very relatable characters. So there's that aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the aspect of the sort of the constellation of deities, which is also quite flexible and relatable characters that draw from human emotion, from different qualities that we have in the manifest world. So
Mm-hmm.
there's that, and then there are the kind of the how-to manuals. Like, okay, you want to practice yoga, you want to learn to be here now. This is how you do it, step by step. And so, depending on where your entry point is to the practice, there really is something for everyone. And it's not necessarily, it's not this kind of perfect first I have to trim my fingernails, then I'm going to have a haircut. And, the many ways that we prepare ourselves for a journey.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, the government locks you down and suddenly your journey starts now without you even realizing it. There's something that happens and you're brought into a place where you're called to action, So that's kind of how, on the one hand, I see the philosophy that it is a really vast ocean that has, an infinite number of diving boards that you can dive into. And depending on the time and place and your mood and all these things. And, let us remember that there's a great amount of indications in the yoga philosophy that really there are no coincidences, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have to remember that, one of the steps is having faith. Yeah. And you can see that faith in a number of different ways. It could be having courage. So courage, if faith is a step too far, you might think, okay, now I have the courage to take a tiny step in a different direction. So, there are many aspects of it. My sense also over the years, it's changed. I read the same text over and over and over again. And depending on the lighting or the mood that I'm in or something that may have happened to me that day, I have a very different interpretation. And that's also, of course, it's written in the Yoga Sutra. So yes, we all have our own perception that's changing all the time.
Mm.
So that's sort of my entry point into the texts. I did study philosophy in university, and I didn't grow up in a religious family, and the Hindu texts and the Buddhist texts really ignited something in me that I had never heard of or experienced before. And yet a lot of it was so far out for me to grasp onto that a vast portion of what I read in university, I really set aside for many years. And it was only, maybe 20 years ago when I started more of the asana practice that I wanted to get them back out and go again, take another deep dive in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I love what you said there about the journey starting when we're least expecting it. The needs, the lockdown. Yeah, the government literally announced a lockdown, and we're like, whoa, hold on a minute. Nobody was prepared. And you're right. Like when I went off to climb Kilimanjaro one time, and it's like, right, I'm gonna buy this and this and this, and you get all the equipment and you get yourself ready and you think of the route and you have everything planned. But the big journeys in life, they come when nobody's expecting.
And I think also, so much of this is the mental perception of what yoga is. I remember the first time I was going off to India. This is many years ago, maybe 15 years ago. And I remember, someone was asking me, oh, what are you doing in India? I'm going to go practice yoga, and so I went off. I went to Mysore. I went to some of the ashrams. But what I didn't understand at that point was the yoga, really the learning of going to a place like India or being in a place like we are now. It's learning how to handle, all of these different challenges with a different mindset. So that, it's not like, okay, now you're starting to practice yoga and all of your life's worries and challenges go away. This is the sort of misnomer.
Hey, Lizzie, don't come on, don't burst the bubble.
But it's more like, yes, but to have hope that over time, the way that you handle those challenges changes. So they're not so traumatizing and dramatic, but so we learn to take a different view. Instead of being deep into something and not being able to see the forest through the trees. So much of yoga is about these juxtapositions and negotiations between two things. So the lockdown and the bigger picture, what happens afterward, and being present now is the place that's in the middle of those two things. So I guess that's what I mean, that learning how to be adaptable,
Mm-hmm.
learning how to understand that whether we see it or not, every moment has its two sides, and that when we're present, those two things come to a balance point, and that's yoga. That's the integration.
Mm-hmm. Okay, no, that's yeah, that makes sense. Now, when we're talking about the yogic text, because I know that we've got a lot of people who are on the movers group who are really interested to dive in to explore some of the yoga philosophy around this. Which texts do you sort of think of? Which are your favorites that you're sort of rereading at the moment?
Okay, so one of the things about the most ancient texts are usually there are a lot of different interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually tonight running around to get a couple of my more beloved books, and
Mm-hmm.
one of the ones, I don't know if it's going to be a mirrored screen or not. Let's see. No, this is the very first version of the Bhagavad Gita that I got, which is the Bhagavad Gita is a small poem inside a longer epic journey, the Mahabharata. And this version, you can see I read it many times by Satchitananda, and anything by Satchitananda tends to be very accessible.
Mm-hmm.
So the other versions of this texts, because all of these texts that are ancient are written in Sanskrit, and to be able to get an entry point into that means that they've been translated into English. So
Mm-hmm.
some of the meaning has been lost if you would translate it directly. What's nice about this particular version is that, and it's the Living Gita, and I can type it into the screen afterward, is there's a lot of storytelling to explain the
Mm-hmm.
various slokas of the text. So if it's not very clear, it's a poem. So there's some creative license taken in the initial version. And then over time, sometimes based on which version you're reading, it can get lost. So this one has a lot of stories that you would be able to describe to a young child of maybe 8 or 9 years old about learning to not make a judgment about something, to withhold judgment, for example. And there are many other texts like this too in this particular version. So that's one I would recommend.
Mm-hmm.
The other is the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, which is more so. If the Living Gita, which I just showed, is more of the epic saga,
Mm-hmm.
really that is about what it means to be human and to have doubt and to have worry and to need to try and almost muddle your way through fear to arrive at courage, to make transformational changes in how you live, let's say, to be in a place like we talked about, so you can be more easeful in your life. Then the Yoga Sutra, there are many versions, and my very first version, I think this is even the second or third copy of my first version. And this one is also by Satchitananda,
Mm-hmm.
because again of his ability to be accessible with language.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not very flowery or esoteric, but it's written in a colloquial way, so you can start to gain a handle on some of the basic principles right away.
Right. Yeah, I must say I've given that particular copy a bit of a read, and it's actually not that straightforward, Lizzie. It's not kind of like the riveting read that we might be looking for. So it's that kind of way of being able to work with other people to kind of get their understanding as well. I think that's quite an interesting part of it. And I think that it'd be quite interesting to hear your thoughts on the, how you might interpret some of the not very straightforward things that are said that will help us through this sort of journey of navigating discomfort and restlessness, and how we can become a little bit more courageous.
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way, because it's, it's kind of like when you're ready, you're ready. So we all need different entry points. And one of the books, before I go into my interpretation of it and how I maybe got a handle on things, but there's another book that isn't one of the classic books of yoga, but a very important book to I would say, the kind of, I want to use the word zeitgeist, but it's sort of like the essence of the teachings, which is by Ram Dass. It's called
That's so interesting that you found that, because I've been leafing my way through it.
Yes.
And I'm just I do not find that accessible, Lizzie.
Yes, it's not. I mean, maybe not.
You can't even read it. Like the typeface, it's all over the place, that book. It's like he's tripping when he wrote it.
Well, he kind of was. I mean, he had some mystical experiences by then, and this was his kind of creative output of that. But I would say, for me, to be honest, the way that I understand the yogic philosophy that is beyond the texts and sort of the more esoteric literature is by being in nature. And, if you open up the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali, the very first scripture and the very first word is now, atta yoga nushasanam. And, the thing about the text is there are always different ways of seeing it. So one of the translations of this is, now this is yoga, as it is in the natural world, as it's experienced, as it's exhibited in the natural world. And that natural world outside, and what the birds are doing right now.
Sorry.
That's another reminder to be here now, and so it's all about starting to break down our interpretations and our perspectives, that some people may think that they need to go to a yoga class to practice yoga. And if there's no class, if the studio's closed, there's no yoga. And actually just taking the time to have an alarm on your clock, or, every time the phone rings, it's a reminder to check back in.
Right.
And it's the same if you can connect, whatever it is, and everyone has something different that's meaningful to that person. It could be art, it could be cooking, it could be music, it could be reading a book, it could be paper macheing or crafting, but the thing is that it's not ever one direction. It's got to be two things, so that there's a tension of relationship. That's the first thing, because in order to come to a balance, we need two poles, so that thing could be me connecting with nature, and finding that listening to the birds and taking some time to just become aware of the sound, to just be able to observe something happening that's outside of your mental fluctuations, because the mental fluctuations will continue to pull us back into the past or into the future. And neither one of those things, I mean, another great book is Eckhart Tolle's Be Here Now. None of those, the past doesn't exist. And there's a great quote, give up hope of a better past. That's not going to happen. The future is very unknown, and when we start to consider the future, usually it lends us to being worried about something that we can't really control. And so, having something that tethers us, and again, so that's that tethering of being in the present, that is really important to find out what that is. And, another thing that for me in my own meditation practice, I practice a meditation form that brings me into my body, and to be able to observe from the big movements. As the big movements settle, it's like the little pieces of flint in an ocean. As the big parts of my body settle, I can allow for the more subtle things to start to become interesting in my awareness. and
Mm-hmm.
I can get lost in that. And that's a way, it's in a way, it's not being present, it's concentrating on something to hold a presence instead of allowing the mind to go really far afield. If that, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, to an extent, I suppose that's how I would treat a yoga practice, as something to, I feel these funny sensations on the mat that are cross between sort of discomfort and pain mostly, to bring me back. And I
Yes.
suppose that's exactly what, I'm the same. I'm a big nature lover and I love gardening. And for me and my dogs, and for me, these are the things which bring me to the now, because you can't be in any other place when you're doing these things. So yeah, it does make sense, and it's interesting that that the Yoga Sutras start with now, and that actually, what is quite interesting during this lockdown time is that a lot of the conversations around I'm hearing are around worry and anxiety about the future. And I think part of a lot of our collective worry is about what the future might bring, and what post-lockdown world means, and what it means. What are we gonna suffer? Are our loved ones gonna suffer? Are we gonna, there's a lot of uncertainty there. And I think it's very interesting to be able to sort of take this macrocosm as this is a little slice of what it is to be in yoga. Maybe this is kind of how I'm seeing it, because I'm like, okay, on the one hand, I have, like everybody else, no idea about my diary, no idea about schedules, no idea about meetings, and a lot of people, no idea about income, a lot of about health, about the main things in their life, like the pillars of stability in their life, when that's all taken apart. And when that happens, and there is no future that is discernible in the way that we thought it was, then we're brought into this now. And it's that sort of feeling of discomfort, which is interesting to me, and is the thing which I really want us to all be able to sort of, I suppose, navigate together, to work out how are we going through the now. How is now for you?
So, well, some of the things you mentioned are, I, I can't remember what you just said about, the pillars of stability.
Mm,
That, so much of this is shining a light on the false construct on which, the majority of us are living. That we, take great comfort in having a job. Now, there are many kinds of jobs, but the bottom line is that many people lose their job at any time, and a
mhm,
contract is something that's rip upable.
mhm,
And there's, I guess there's a lot of talk equally about what was normal, and was normal really sustainable? Was it
mhm,
really a healthy existence
mm,
based on something that was true?
mhm,
Or were many people like spinning out of control, pretending to be 20 when they're 50, pretending to have power, and really they just have an expensive car, or the lifestyle, that all of these assumptions about who we are is really what we're talking about. And
mm,
that's really beyond, I would say, the uncertainty of the future.
mhm,
Yoga is again, it's about shedding skin to get to the true meaning of who we really are in our natural state, without the constructs of thinking who we are, that is going to change inevitably over time.
mm,
And so yes, and there's financial concern, but to be honest, there's a lot of financial instability in the world all the time. There's an up and down. There was the Great Depression. There were, countless times after that where the economy rose and fell. And so I think so much of this is a moment to deconstruct, you know, our message to ourselves about who we are, And really, this is yoga in the natural world. And the next step of the first sutra, this is yoga in the natural world. And we're part of that natural world. We're not separate. We're not separate from the earth. We're not here to rape the earth and destroy it by our small-minded needs of going to Ibiza for a holiday or whatever. But like, how can we learn to be more in symphony, both together as humans, but also with all of nature that we are part of, that we're not better than. If you go on to read all of various texts, that there is a sameness in a manifest existence, that we don't have more of a right to be here than another species on the earth. That's a mental construct that is not helpful, that will lead to more suffering. So I guess the bottom line is that there are anxieties because we all have a mind, and the mind will always be one with winds that pass through. And part of yoga is certainly learning how to put a framework so we're not blowing all over the place all the time. But like you were mentioning, your yoga asana practice, which is a wonderful disciplined framework, so that you're not doing whatever you want to with your body or nothing at all, but here's a fixed period of time. Here is a safe manner to explore your body, to be effortful and focused, concentrated in whatever those movements are, and then looking at, yes, and things come up. Great, things come up. Physical pain, maybe, but can you see that physical pain, how much of that physical pain is mental? You saying, oh, my hips, they're sore, I haven't moved them in 5 weeks. This is painful. Or, oh, I'm having a sensation in my body, I'm having to watch that. Again, there's the negotiation of how much effort before it becomes a struggle. And how much is, oh, but there's nothing, some people are hypermobile, and those hypermobile people sometimes go to a class and fling themselves all over the place and don't really feel anything. But I can't feel anything. I hear this.
Yeah.
So, part of being a yogi, a practitioner, is you're looking for the relationship, always from the macroscopic level, the whole body, or the whole world, or the whole universe, to the microscopic. Oh, but I can't feel anything when I extend my arm. It's like it's not attached to my body. So then the point is, oh, you need to look deeper. Maybe there's a point that something else needs to be reined in, so you have that tether that I mentioned earlier. And I want to say something about the tether, because that's just, it's a sort of an analogy, I guess, that, okay, we have a vertical spine that's tethering us into gravity. But in a way, the yoga practice is like a pole, a fixed place that you're here now practicing yoga, and the mind is going to the left, to the right, up and down, and yet you come back to that practice. And so whether it's meditation or asana practice or washing the dishes mindfully or gardening, it's about starting to observe when the mind goes away, where it goes, being able to acknowledge, is that helping me to be positive, to be present, to be at ease? Oh, no. Oh, then why do I do it? And over time, it's like breaking a habit pattern that doesn't feed you in a positive way.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I really, I love that thought of whatever it is can bring us back into the now, and the yoga practice being one tool for doing that. And so it's interesting that right now, many people are aware that they're not in the now, because we are so discombobulated about what might or might not be happening in the future, and with our families and our loved ones, going through the levels of anxiety.
Yes.
And really, that's the kind of thing which, I know that some of the yogic texts sort of talk about this, and talk about how to deal with the demons, within our minds, because I suppose that anxiety, that inability to be right here now, that's just a sort of, that's just a demon. So yeah, what would you, what do you think about that? I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think that that's true. Usually, when there's anxiety, it's a very self-absorptive thing that lends itself to suffering. And so we're not able to be present for other people. Like that's what happens. We're anxious. We're preoccupied. People that are getting in the way of that preoccupation, it's like we attach onto something because we're afraid. So whatever you attach onto is better than nothing, because somehow even the known of the anxiety can somehow be more comforting than the unknown of not having it there with us. It's like a companion, that. And so I think
it's better to feel anxious than to feel alone, I suppose.
Yeah, or to feel something that you're not familiar with, that you've never felt before. To just be able to be present can be a daunting and very intangible thing. So, we come back to relationship. And that relationship is, can you put one front foot in front of the other? And somehow I think we're being hacked into some.
Yeah. I've just seen that.
Maybe he needs some attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. Isn't it?
Hello, Kunta.
Yeah.
I like raisins in my salad, by the way. But anyway, I wanted to say that a part of this is learning to. It's like anxiety. If it's a way that you've learned how to live, in a way, it's a habit pattern. It may not feel very good. It may, lead to sleepless nights or an inability to land and be, present in gravity. It may, all of those things, but you know it. So you keep going back to it. It's a way that you manage. And in a way, the yoga practice is asking us to disrupt those patterns. Like, the asana practice is a disruption. It's an actual intervention to how we are in our daily life. Like, you're not lying on the couch. You're not standing on one leg waiting for the bus. You're not, with the phone in one hand. You're intervening. You're saying, wait a minute, I'm going to give myself a structure that's different than the normal way that I do things,
Yeah, right.
And in a way, the Yoga Sutras, when you start to read them, they give very clear advice for intervening into the negative habit patterns. And that's why it may not be the most accessible book, but you can get sort of the best of Yoga Sutras too. So you don't have the whole book to begin, but like the Jiva Mukti chant book has, 5 or 10 or 12 of like the most maybe accessible Yoga Sutra to begin with. And so that can be another entry point, that, the Bible, if that's something that talks to you, there is a very clear code of conduct to, to treat someone else the way you would want to be treated, for example. Those things are not different. So I guess what I'm saying is, for myself, one of the things that I've learned, and again, it's a practice, is that the more you can, give whoever, whatever comes to you, whatever shows up. It was a policeman at my door the other day coming to check on me, that, I'm on the high risk list, and they hadn't heard from me. And there he was. And it was the kindest thing that anyone has done for me in a long time, this police officer coming to check on me. And I would have invited him in and offered him cake if I could have, but it was just, it's whatever appears at this moment of high anxiety, take that as your present focus, and, and love it and treat it like your kind. Your kindness is saying that we are in this together, and that no one really knows what it's going to be like in a month or a year or 5 years. whether the virus was here or not. And by the way, if it wasn't the virus, it could be a million other things that may happen between here and now, or here and there. And so, it's a little bit about, can we use this moment as a disruption, as a positive disruption, to reevaluate how we put one foot in front of the other, and to be present in that time, not to worry too much about 15 steps forward, but can we put one foot in front of the other and wake up and treat yourself in a nourishing way, eat a good breakfast that's going to give yourself, like a garden, the nourishment you need. Yes. And, I think that also things were getting really out of hand before this happened, that we were trying to compete with computers and to do 25 or 50 things extra than what's maybe in our human capability for one day. So, to take one day and say, today, I'm going to be present. I'm going to have breakfast and feed myself well. I'm going to do maybe one task that needs to be done. I'm going to clean the bathroom, and I'm going to do it with presence. I'm going to do it the best I can to make it clean for whoever I'm sharing this space with, and then you move on to the next thing. But really to stay present with the tasks that we have to do, instead of carrying the list. I mean, there's a million things to do now. There's feeding the birds and tending to the garden and the dishes and the cleaning, and also all of the work, the preparing for what the next weeks look like. How do you plan to do a little bit less in a way that is sustainable, in a way that's nourishing yourself, and to create, like the yoga practice, a framework that is not unlimited, that you don't work till 12 o'clock at night because you don't know day from night anymore. But, your working hours of the day are from 9 to 5, and you give yourself time in the evening to make a good meal and to read a book and to do something that fills you with a little sense of joy and completion. And I really feel that's the entry point to being present in this time.
I really like that, and I know that because I follow what you've been up to on social media, and I know that you've been doing a lot of baking. And has that been sort of part of your present moment practice? How you're sort of dealing with, coping with being a very vulnerable person in a tricky situation? And the reason why I ask isn't to pry; it's because there will be other people like this.
Yes, sure. So, as I was saying, things kind of present themselves to you. And nothing that I've done on this regular life holiday or disruption or this time of virus has been things that I thought I would do. I wanted for a while to take some time off and maybe do more writing. That has manifested not in the way that I thought, or not with, the regularity or the spaciousness. I don't like to eat bread that has any additives. So for me, as soon as there was problems getting food in, I started to realize that I would need to be a little more resourceful, not just with the bread, but everything. I mean, I do like to cook anyway. But so I had kind of, for some reason, I think in January, I felt something was going to happen. I don't know exactly why. But I started to prepare in a way, like I bought a dehydrator, a food dehydrator. I bought a number of kind of things that were not needed at the time, but things that I thought I would be using. So, in that, yes, baking bread has become a part of my daily regime, because it's a healthy way to have grains if you make it in the right way. And it's also very I use my hands for teaching yoga and for the structural body work that I do, and it's a way that I can exercise my hands. It's also a way that, yes, it's, with kneading the bread, it takes time. So you have like 7 minutes at first. You make the bread, you mix the ingredients together, and then you have 7 minutes where you're basically massaging this bread. And that's a wonderful time to chant. So I like to chant mantra because it's very calming for me. So that's like a little 7-minute practice. And the wonderful thing is no one disrupts me because they think that I'm in the kitchen making bread. And nobody likes to help because it's messy and, the yeast smells and there are all these things. So people leave me alone and I have this 7 minutes and it's very, timed 7 minutes and I chant mantra and it's lovely. And then I have to check in on the bread. It's not like, oh, you just do it and you hope for the best, but, then it has to rise. And so you have to wrap it up. It's like nurturing a little child and you let it rise. And if you did a good job, it shows you by rising. And then there's the second step of kneading the bread again. So in case my mind went somewhere else, I have that moment to come back again. And it's very repetitive. And I think that's something that is in the background, like a peripheral thing about the yoga practice. Maybe you realize it, maybe you don't. There's a ton of repetition, a ton. As a teacher, you're constantly saying inhale, exhale. As a student, you're constantly coming back to similar forms in the body. And it's not so you can, tune out, oh, I'm in downward dog now. I can think about the future and my worries and I can look at my pedicure. No, it's to come back and check in. It's a neutralizer. It's a place where you come back. And if your mind has gone somewhere else, if your body has felt all of these disruptive things, it's a chance to come back in, to be here now. And so, any of these processes are like that. Yeah.
I love that. That's so inspiring to me and heartwarming to hear how that tethering process, the process that you were describing from the yogic text that we're needing, the thing which is bringing us to sort of ourselves again, how that tethering sort of combines with the focus and the discipline of that bread making. Like you have that 7 minutes. And in that 7 minutes, you are going to just be there. Like we are when we're in our sort of 60th downward dog of the day, or, as you say, the yoga practice is very repetitive. Oh, here goes another sun salute or whatever. But actually being there for it, that's really an amazing thing. And I think it's really wonderful and heartwarming to hear, because I know also that there are lots of people right now who are so busy because they'll be homeschooling their children at the same time that they're working from home with a full-time job. And, perhaps they don't have outside space for their children to explore. So the kids are a little bit more nuts than usual or whatever. And there's a lot of people who aren't able to do the sort of daily practice that they might normally do because their normal mechanisms are out of the way. And actually, I think that thing of being able to make your practice your bread making or make your practice something else.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, for homeschooling, for sure, it's, depending on the age of the child or, the child's needs, there are, whoops, I hope that wasn't my camera going. There are, there's a whole slew of finding out, there's like, it's like the yoga practice. When you start the yoga practice, there's a warm up, usually, hopefully. And then you go into the asanas and there's like a set thing. And over that time of practicing, you kind of learn, okay, 5 minutes warm up feels pretty good. 20 minutes warm up, I start to kind of get lost. Is this the real practice? Is it a warm up? And so it's like that with homeschooling in a way too, that you realize, oh, well, I have, 10 minutes might be the max that I can have. I have a son who has special needs and, I sit him down 10 minutes. He's okay. He can keep his focus. I can go make my bread in 10 minutes. Yeah. And then, and then the next 10 minutes, maybe I need to be by his side. I also am really lately getting into paper mache. So I then sit with him for another 10 minutes and I get him on track. And then I have a little station with my art supplies there. And I can be doing something that's quite mindful, concentrated. Sometimes I draw in a very detailed way, not on the paper mache. I have many different projects going on, but depending on the amount of time that I have with my son, I can find windows. And it's the same for my personal yoga practice. I also have my yoga mat and my blocks and my props set up there. So I know that, and for me, and the way that he works, he does very well with a frame, a container. Okay, this is 10 minutes. We're going to sit down and, work with some English. So within that, I have 10 minutes. I might have a belt in my hand standing behind him, and I'm doing little shoulder exercises in those 10 minutes. And then, we can move on. So there's many, and I know, Kat, I've seen your posts about gardening that, there's a million ways to weave in a yoga practice and an asana practice also creatively into a day that may be taking a very different shape than it would back in the olden days.
That's it. That's it. And I think it's really nice to just be able to inspire each other, that there are loads of different ways that we can get into the now. And, it doesn't have to be the kind of now you have to sit for an hour and meditate. There are loads of different things. Now, the home retreat starts on Monday. And what that's going to involve is a yoga practice every day and a check-in every day with either a meditation or a Q&A or something like this, where we get to come together as a community. But in the very first session that we're doing on Saturday, there's going to be a bit of an intention setting. So I was thinking that it might be nice for folks to start thinking generally about how they would like to set their intentions for the next couple of weeks or beyond, or what kind of intentions it is that they'd like to sort of realize in themselves. For me, I think that intention setting has been one of the most powerful gifts that yoga's given me, because that thing at the front of the practice where you're like, you can give your practice to somebody and you set an intention for your practice, and that really does frame, in my experience, it really does frame, the feeling I have during that practice, and kind of coming back to that intention throughout the practice, I think is just so, it's kind of like magic, don't you think, Lizzie? Because I know, you're a Jiva Mukti, and that's part of the Jiva Mukti school very strongly, isn't it? So you have your intention and you weave it through, and you have that as part of what you do. How do you work with intention setting?
So that's changed really dramatically for me over the years. I think that when I started practicing this particular method, it was new for me. I practiced Iyengar and I practiced Ashtanga, and those practices tended to be kind of roll your sleeves up, get into asana, and sweat out your anger and whatever. Like that was, for me at least, this was my, this is what I did 25, 30 years ago, that's where I was, And then as I came into Jiva Mukti, the intention thing was, it was new. It felt new to me, and it was something I needed to be reminded of during the practice, and it didn't really tether itself into my day-to-day life right away. And then once it did, once I sort of started to go down the rabbit hole a little bit more, I went through a big period of remorse and guilt in a way that I hadn't been really, I wasn't really tuned in to how much, how integrated, how interbeing we all are. And I think that, as a young 20-year-old, I operated out of really a kind of a self-absorbed place, that life was easy, and it was about me mainly. I guess that's the way being 18 or 20 is for some people. That's the way, that's the way that it was for me. It's not to say that I didn't value other beings and didn't value animals, because all of that was already a part of my life.
Mm-hmm.
But now what I wanted to say about intention setting is that it can be very, very simple. It can be very simple, and for many, many years it was about connecting to other beings that I already loved, that I reminded myself of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next couple of years, it's like you're given the challenge that you're ready for, and at one point I realized, oh, but I can offer my practice and my life up to people or animals or beings that I've never even seen.
Mm-hmm.
And I might even, if I go down another step, they might even be able to feel that somehow. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not limit ourselves, because, one of the things is what can come up for some people is, well, what's the use?
Yeah.
I set an intention, like, it never worked. I mean, my grandmother, she died anyway. These are the things that can come up,
Mm-hmm.
that I set an intention and my expectations were not met. So why should I bother? I mean, these are things that I can say have come up for me in my past.
Yeah.
Now, what I wanted to say about intentions now and how crystallized it has become for me over the past couple of years is the intention is the tether.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I come to Tadasana and I'm grounding down through my feet and the crown of my head is lifting up, the intention is what's lifting my head up and connecting me to all other beings. And in a way, it's that intention that tethers me, whether it's an asana practice, we look at energetics and efficiency in the body. So there's not like a blockage or a break in the chain, but it's the same in life. When you go out the door, the intention is the tether that directs my action for how I'm going to take a walk,
Mm-hmm.
how I can be present now. Can I find an intention that is one of basic goodness, that I would like to leave the world better than I came into it?
Mm-hmm.
Can I leave the intention, can I be with the intention that every being I come into contact with may have been put there for a reason, or may have been put into place or a situation, so that I'm being tested? Can I rise to this occasion to set the intention beyond my mental judgment or fluctuations of the mind?
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. It does. I think that's really useful. And I love the starting with a really simple intention, because you're absolutely right. We can very easily sort of think, oh, it doesn't, these things don't make a difference. It doesn't matter. But actually to start really, really simple and use that as the tether.
Yeah. I mean, it can be as simple as, I was thinking about this kind of what's the use moment that we can get into. Certainly, what's the use? I don't have to present myself to the world, so
Mm-hmm.
I can maybe stop washing my hair, stop brushing my teeth, eat whatever I want. Who cares? I'm in lockdown for
Yeah,
a
that's right.
year. Nobody's going to see me. Nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
But this idea of like a seedling,
Mm-hmm.
it's like gardening. There's a seedling and you plant it,
Mm-hmm.
and you water that one seedling to see if it might grow.
Mm-hmm.
You need that one loaf of bread to see if it might rise.
Yeah.
And you don't get too attached.
Yeah.
If it doesn't burst out, I did something wrong. Maybe I didn't water it the right amount, or I need to learn something. It's like yoga. Some people come into the asana practice, they think that they're not fit enough, they're too old, they're too they don't breathe well, so why should I can't do yoga. When it's very clear from the ancient texts that yoga is for everybody, no matter how young, how old, how discombobulated in the body, that if you put one foot in front of the other, with an intention of being present and doing the best you can to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And show up means like, I'm going to be present for this, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to tune in to this live streaming thing and not do the dishes and watch the TV at the same time, but I'm going to show up and be here really fully just for now, you know, for a minute or for 2 minutes. And it's the same, like, can I put one foot in front of the other, not worrying about how my yoga practice was last week when I was at that nice studio, or how it might be in 10 weeks time, but right now, like, how is it for you right now to do what you can? And I think that's, for me, where intention has helped me like a string of beads. You know, you put one bead on at a time, and before you know it, you have a beautiful necklace.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very, that's really sage advice, Lizzie. And I really do hope that that's helped folks who are thinking about setting intentions and how that might, you know, how they might come about. And also, I hope that the conversation will have helped people to see that the yoga practice isn't even necessarily the daily class that we send you. Maybe your yoga practice is something completely different. Maybe your yoga practice is doing the bread, is feeding the birds, is taking a mindful walk. Maybe your yoga practice is something else. And that should also be part of this. And it's good, I think, to have that as a tether to come home with.
Well, it could also be, I mean, it could also be the intention is to show up for your retreat each morning, to check in and to do what you can, and to not be guilty, to not, you know, but really to challenge yourself to do what you can one day at a time. Not, oh, I've got to commit to this 10-day retreat and I'm going to do it all and it's going to be great. No, you know, that's a pattern in and of itself that can be very harmful. You know, that you end up sort of slugging your way through life because you're letting your mind and your ego lead you to the end, instead of really being present to what's possible, what's enjoyable, what moment you can really savor and be with, instead of, you know, the mind saying, you know, how many of us have, like, you know, I used to run marathons, and I can tell you that was not an enjoyable thing. It was totally mental. You know, I wanted to do these marathons, and you know, it's not to say I didn't learn something from it, but 1 mile at a time is the way. And like an intention, you know, you might not be able to change the world, but you can change yourself for the next 10 minutes into catching the negative thoughts that come up and extinguishing them, you know, 10 minutes at a time. Maybe it's 5 minutes at a time. And so, you know, I think the retreat is a wonderful thing for people to cotton on to. It's a framework for, you know, exploring how to break the habit patterns that are there in your daily life, that might also include telling yourself you can't, or it's not for you, or, you know, you have such a wonderful group of different teachers. There's really truly some message for everyone to be heard.
Yeah, thank you. I think so. And again, to say that, you know, the physical practice that we send as a suggested practice, it may not be appropriate for everybody's body, but there will be a practice on there which is appropriate to do for everybody, because we even have just the breathing, and maybe that for you is what you need right now. So I think that's another way of seeing it and being intelligent about the use of the practices, and realizing that, you know, it's not like a forcing. It's not, I'm being sent this practice, I must do it. No, maybe it's not appropriate for your body today.
Well, also, you know, there's a question of learning what is, like, you know, maybe you need a table in front of you instead of the mat on the floor. So learning how to break down the fixed ideas of what asana practice is. Like, maybe you need to use the wall to find the balance, or maybe you need to hold on to your knee instead of your foot, or, you know, whatever. But I, you know, I think that where there's enough furniture around in the house, there's a way to find some, looking for the relationship is an important reminder, I would say.
That's a really, really good one, Lizzie. And Lizzie and I have between us talked about how we can do. We'll share with you guys at one time. We'll share maybe a live with how to use the house as your adjustment to make your yoga the right practice for you. And because I think that's a really great discussion to have during lockdown, when we're sort of, we're surrounded by tables and chairs and small spaces, but how we can make that all work for us. So yeah, thanks for bringing that, Lizzie. I'm aware that we, time is moving on. I want to be, I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So if you guys have questions of Lizzie about any of the texts, any of the things that we've discussed, if you would put your comments in there, and Lizzie and I will check that out. If you have any other thoughts, we'd love to hear. Yeah, we'd love to hear what your intentions are. Mimi and I will be doing the opening ceremony on Monday evening, and I think that'll be a really lovely chance. Kerry says, thank you. I'm going to spend some time considering present well-being. As a frontline worker, this will be beneficial to assist in finding an intention, see me through the retreat and beyond. Well, thank you, Kerry, for being a frontline worker, and thank you for everything you're doing for all of us so that we can all stay safe. I really appreciate you. Thank you. Cool. Yeah. Any other thoughts, Lizzie?
Well, just on Carrie's behalf, it's impossible to imagine what on a daily basis must be happening behind the scenes, and how taxing that must be. And I would say that for myself, when I was really at my lowest peak, and I have only the NHS to thank for my life. My teacher gave me a mantra that really helped me see me through. And, if you can find some small, something small that you can say to yourself that is like a place that you can take refuge inward, because you may not be able to say, oh, I've had enough, let me just have 5 minutes and gather my thoughts, but you may need to be somehow looking for the shelter and the refuge inward. And a mantra can be really very, very valuable to nourish yourself in that way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for all of
your thoughts.
Thank you to everybody for joining us, because it would be always fun to talk to Lizzie. I could chat to you for hours about this, but it's way more fun to be here in community. So thank you for showing up, everybody, and for your generosity and your comments.
And your interest.
The one I had to delete.
Good.
Thank you, guys. Much love, and I'll see you Monday evening. Okay, take care, Lizzie.
Everyone, enjoy it.
Bye.